Welcome to day 3 of Demystifying Industry, hosted by Learn with Libby. So, this is our free 3-day virtual event clarifying all your pharmaceutical industry questions and providing you exposure to diverse industry professionals. So, tonight we'll cover commercial and regulatory roles within the industry. But before you hear from our wonderful speakers, I have a few logistics to cover. So, little disclaimer here. If you've been here the other 2 nights, you've heard it before, but the information presented is for educational purposes only. The views expressed during the event are those of the speakers and panelists and do not represent any of the entities they may be affiliated with. And so, again, for our 3-day guests, this event is being recorded, so the recordings will be emailed to all registered attendees and then shared on YouTube as well at the conclusion of the 3-day event, as long as there are no tech issues. And so for the Q&A tonight, we're going to use Slido. So use the chat feature on Zoom to share your thoughts and put your questions in the Q&A on Slido. And so the next slide, you'll be able to join Slido and have access to that throughout the presentation. All the questions will be addressed at the end during our Q&A panel. And then last, if you find something insightful or helpful, share it on your socials. If you found it helpful, chances are someone else in your network will too. So tag at learnwithlibby.rx on Instagram or Learn with Libby on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to share the insights that you all gather from tonight. And so I'll leave this slide up for a little bit so that you can join Slido and have that ready to go when you have a question pop in your head. On Slido, there is a tab for Q&A and a tab for polls. So please make sure that you're putting your questions in the Q&A section. And then also, as other people populate questions in there, you can like a question that tells me that lots of people are interested in that answer, and I'll be more likely to ask those questions during our Q&A session. So make sure you have this pulled up, and you'll have a couple more opportunities if you don't get it this time. I'll give it a couple seconds. All right. And so tonight we will be covering all things business. So we've got marketing, market access, and then regulatory affairs, and then our Q&A panel at the end. And so here is your lineup of speakers and panelists for this evening. Wide range of experience here. And so super excited to pass it off to our first speaker to get us started with marketing.
Yes, thank you, Libby. Thanks for having me today. This seems like a great platform for those interested in industry. I'll quickly introduce myself before we get into marketing. My name is Stephen Najib. I currently am a senior marketing manager at AstraZeneca, focused on oncology, specifically GI cancers. I work on the US business, and I've been there for just over 2 years now. Um, Walking back how I ended up in marketing, there's obviously the baseline kind of always fascination with healthcare. And I was on the path towards clinical at my University of Florida College of Pharmacy, and instead chose to pursue my curiosity that lying in the pharmaceutical industry. Through a variety of different jobs and experiences leading up to grad school, I was able to make the connection that in our healthcare system, there are those who produce and deliver healthcare, then there are those who consume and provide healthcare. It's just a matter of kind of which side of the aisle do you want to be on? And I found that industry would put me on the side of production and delivery of healthcare. US marketing, I think, is a great experience because of where it sits in the organization. And we'll get a bit more into that in the next slide. But first, we could start with just a basic definition supplied by pharma. Pharmaceutical marketing is a dynamic and highly regulated sector. It involves the promotion and distribution of pharmaceutical products with the primary goal of informing HCPs and consumers about the benefits and appropriate use of those medications. So, firstly, there are a few things to unpack here that are underlined. This is an extremely dynamic space, and it is big emphasis on highly regulated. There are a lot of regulations to navigate when it comes to promoting a product in a FDA compliant way. This is a huge part of marketing, the ability to learn and understand the boundaries of promotion. Ultimately, what we want to do is promote the science behind our product, highlighting what we see at the end here, which are its benefits and the appropriate use of our products. You go to the next slide. Stepping back a bit and just looking at marketing in the US, the US marketing team, this is an extremely highly matrixed and cross-functional part of the organization. US marketing essentially interacts with every single other commercial function and non-commercial functions, such as medical affairs and regulatory. Looking here, even in this comprehensive list, just me glancing through, I could tell there are some missing functions, which truly goes to show how cross-functional marketing is. If you look at the right-hand side, kind of all of these support functions within the organization somehow feed into marketing and marketing feeds into them. And on the left-hand side, if I could highlight just three quick examples, we could start all the way up the top, global commercial. So the global commercial team or global marketing team, they're typically involved in very early strategy planning. So let's say there's a identified positive phase 3 asset now getting ready to hopefully be launched into the US market and affiliate markets. The global team helps build that early strategy, building some epidemiology, building out the brand narrative, the story, working with medical to get our scientific narrative bind up. They deliver to the US market their version of what they think strategy is. And then the US market then takes that, either builds on it or adopts it relative to the US market. Another example here we could look at our sales or sales leadership. Marketing plays a huge role in equipping our sales force with their tools and their selling guidance. Anytime there's a pharmaceutical representative detailing to a physician, for instance, the tools that they use, the actual pieces that they're holding or the iPad that they're holding, the content that they're detailing off of is created by marketing and goes through a rigorous kind of production process, both with marketing's objectives in mind and, of course, our regulatory restrictions. And that brings me to the last example I want to touch on here, which is promotional regulatory. Of course, all of our pieces that lit out in the market went through a review with a team of multiple people at the center of them being promotional regulatory. So there's a lot of interaction and collaboration between marketing and promotional regulatory affairs to ensure on-label promotion, to ensure that we're appropriately displaying our data, and to assess for any kind of risk tolerance in our messaging with our pieces. Next slide, please. Just to quickly give kind of an organizational chart structure view up on the top. In the US business, you could see here the range from the left-hand side, the franchise head, all the way to the right-hand side, which is the promotion lead. We can start on franchise head. Again, this is, in my experience, of course, every organization I think is structured a bit differently. I try to keep this pretty high level. I would say across most companies that are fully built out, you'll probably see a similar structure, maybe with different titles. But a franchise head, say in this case, they are responsible for the franchise. This is typically a vice president level type of role. A franchise could mean one product. It can mean multiple products. What I definitely know it means is it's at a minimum going to be many indications. The franchise head is, given they sit in the US, they're ultimately held accountable to the US business for the franchise that they represent. That includes not just what we're doing today, but what we're doing next year, what we're doing 3 years, what we're doing in 5 years. So they also have a unique lens into kind of the pipeline and the future success of the franchise that they lead. Right below that, you'll have some sort of marketing head. So again, this is a head type of role, maybe seeing multiple products, definitely seeing multiple indications, but their core objective is to be the head of marketing when it comes to their indications. That's a huge kind of piece of the pie. Typically, this person reports directly into their franchise head. And typically, this person as well leads a team of marketers that you see on the right-hand side. You can see how we're narrowing here as we keep moving from left to right. So a therapeutic area lead or a director level type of position. Again, this is someone who likely is on one product, but leads multiple indications, for example. One more to the right is an indication lead. So this is someone who leads one specific indication. And then all the way to the right is promotion lead or marketing manager or senior marketing manager. This is the person ultimately responsible for the actual execution and promotion of the product and executing on the strategy that's laid out for this product. Uh, Going to the bottom half here, under the US marketing umbrella, we can make a clear line between HCP strategy and patient or direct to consumer strategy. These are two unique lenses of what marketing looks like in the US. And it really boils down to who is your main customer. Is your customer a healthcare practitioner or is your customer the patient? And that kind of informs how we message, what type of materials we make, what and how we highlight about our product. And all the way on the bottom, you could see these are all the different types of channels that we tap into in the US marketing. So we enable the sales team that's known as personal promotion or P. There's peer-to-peer education, which is in the medical education bucket, where we provide, for instance, physicians materials to then educate other physicians. We have the digital space or non-personal promotion. Think of kind of the internet as a whole, just the ad agency as a whole. We have the conference or Congress channel, of course. Being in oncology, there's a few large conferences such as ASCO that are very relevant to us, and that's kind of a big time for our business where we get a lot of customer interactions. And finally, you could see advocacy or PAGs, which stands for patient advocacy groups. Of course, you could see how all of these channels might be more relevant to HCP versus DTC, depending on which side of the aisle you're on. We can go next. My final slide here, wrapping up US marketing, just skills needed as a pharmaceutical marketer. Now, these are, again, this is just my stab at things. I definitely want to give the disclaimer that skills are synonymous with development. Skills are things that we have, but they're also things that we work on getting or we work on improving. As trained pharmacists, which is the majority of us here, or just being in the healthcare space as a whole, we are naturally equipped with many of these through our training. And it's just our responsibility to identify where our gaps are and to build on. Starting from the top, ability to balance multiple work streams, especially in marketing. If we go back to that very first definition, one of the first words underlined was dynamic. It is an extremely dynamic environment. That means there's constantly going to be changes. There's going to be new priorities. There's going to be multiple priorities. And the ability to balance all of those is definitely important. Skill number 2 would be strategic thinking to solve for business needs. This is something that is very unique to the environment that you're in, because business needs definitely vary depending on the scenario. So being able to strategize and to think about solutions for what the business is looking for is an important skill. Number 3 is a huge fundamental of marketing, not just in the pharmaceutical space, but just as a whole, which is understanding the customer point of view, wearing the shoes of your customer and understanding what is it that they are looking for and seeing if I can be part of the answer to providing them with what they're looking for. Agility and adaptability. This is, again, a very dynamic environment. Being able to pivot, adjust, make changes, think quickly, make swift decisions is absolutely imperative. Working across multiple teams, of course, is inherent given how matrix and cross-functional this part of the organization is. Working across multiple teams means learning how to speak and deal with different types of people. It means understanding every person's contributions, understanding what value they provide to the business, and working hand in hand with them to ultimately drive the business. And finally, the last skill, very important for a marketer, is storytelling. The ability to deliver the right message at the right time to the right person. Again, knowing what needs to be heard and learning how to package that into a story is extremely important. I think the art or creative side of pharmaceutical marketing. I believe that brings me to the end of my section. Thanks all for listening, and I'm looking forward to hearing some questions at the end.
Thank you so much. Is there one piece of advice that you would advise our pharmacy students or others on the call that are looking to get into marketing?
Yeah, one piece of advice I would say is to always stay curious and infuse in yourself the ability to self-lead and to self-motivate. I think building on that will allow you the confidence to pursue what might seem like a pretty out there type of field, a little bit outside of our comfort zone. So the ability to self-lead and to always stay curious, I would say, are my two biggest pieces of advice.
Thank you for the insight. And next, we'll move on to Dr. Campbell to present her slides.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on this call to share my story and my non-traditional pharmacy story. I'm Ween Campbell, currently National GPO Provider Networks Director for in Market Access. That was the role that I had with Mirati Therapeutics, which is a biotech company. Since then, I transitioned recently over to Syndex, which is another biotech company, and I'm somewhat in the market access arena, but really in the health outcomes liaison world. So this is my first slide. It just really shares the story of my non-traditional pharmacy journey. Like y'all, I began as a pharmacy student and worked in the hospital. I started my career at Northwestern as an inpatient pharmacist with my hem-oncs and just really loved the oncology discipline. I really love comorbidities, HIVs. Of course, occasionally I have to do internal medicine roundings. I always come back to oncology, and it's just that's what really spiked my interest to stay in oncology. Throughout my journey, I had sprinkles here and there with other companies such as Walgreens or Home Infusion, and then took a jog over to get my MBA. But what really led me to commercial was my first foot in the door with mixed specialty. And that is my first commercial role as a clinical pharmacist. And then I transitioned to a sales specialist. That is a distribution company. So the other distribution company within that arena would be Oncology Supply or Cardinal. So if you're interested in like commercial world, how do I get from A to Z? I just encourage you to explore that world. And then because of all the little pearls that I picked up along the way, I was able to get into GSK as a medical care team lead and then transition into Mirati Therapeutics into market access. So it's not like a planned out career path or anything, but it was just staying curious and going, huh, can I do that? What skills do I need? And what do I need to put in my bucket to use that later? And that propelled me to where I am today. Next slide. So some of the roles and responsibilities in market access are really is just high level strategic account management because you'll get a list of accounts. My specific role was just really in GPO management, that's group purchasing organization. And the reason I got my job as a director of national market access was because of my tenure at McKesson Specialty Distribution. Pharma usually wouldn't really want you to come on board and train you unless you have something to bring to them. What value are you bringing? A lot of my peers that are medical science liaison or marketing per se, they have a nugget to bring to that pharma company so they can use your expertise and use what you've learned along the way. And that goes to the GPO management part, how I got the job. PBDM is population-based decision maker engagement, and that's just leveraging your network, right? So throughout your career, you've made a lot of friends. You have also talked to your um, health HCPs and KOLs. Those are just like super alphabet soup in the pharma industry, but really your physicians, right? The people that touch the patients so that you're engaging them because then you're bringing also to pharma your Rolodex. So throughout the journey, always build bridges. That's what I always encourage. Network if you can. And then another part of my job would just managing contracts, coordinating and evaluating, implementing contracts reviews, master services agreements. Contract pull through is with pharma. We are with all pharma companies. It's really at the bottom line. We're trying to get patients access to our drugs. At the same time, we try to have contracts for end users or community oncologies to help mitigate some of the costs that they would incur. And then with biotechs, they're always looking for molecules. They're always bringing molecules to market. So that's launch planning, pre-launch, post-launch, and throughout your whole journey, you're touching every part of the business. And then also just identify and develop opportunities that would align with the brand strategy with your group purchasing organization. Next slide, please. Just a little pearl, like how to set yourself apart. For me, I just stayed curious. But if I were to share anything story, if I were to, if you were my sister or brother and you want to break into industry, I said, hey, if you can set yourself to be a subject matter expert at one thing and what you're really good at, it's either in oncology or hematology, it's either in drug distribution or contracting at the hospital, advocacy, ask questions, you're setting yourself apart. You're not in the general. So you're bringing that nugget, that pearl into the industry. I had a late mentor in my career. I didn't know the power of mentorship or two, and there are never too many. Everyone can be a mentor. Even you can be my mentor because I can always learn something. Just connect with your mentor, ask questions because you never know. Mentors, they just want you to succeed. Networking as you are doing right now. Come on, be curious, listen and learn, and just gain some experience. And then, more importantly, what I learned about pharma as I go through this journey is everybody has a brand. And what is your brand, right? And then really think about your authenticity and how do you bring that when you show up for your meetings, when you're showing up to connect with your mentors, when you're showing up to your interviews. So just think about your brand and what your brand is or going to be. I think that is my last slide. And thank you so much for having me on this call.
Yes, thank you so much. The insights are always so helpful. You brought lots of nuggets. So I appreciate it. And I know that the listeners on the call do as well. So here I just want to put in a plug. We have a couple questions already in the Slido, but take a chance to pop any of your questions in there and view what has already been put in there and give it a thumbs up if it's something you also want to know. So it'll help guide our Q&A panel a little bit later too. So I'll give you guys a couple seconds to populate it with any questions. All right, keep those questions rolling in, and we'll switch over to discussing regulatory affairs.
Thank you so much, Libby. And I agree with the insights from the last speaker to the T about being authentic, building a brand. All that is extremely important. And we'll dive into that a little bit during my presentation. To introduce myself, my name is Brian Arana Madriz. I'm a senior manager in regulatory affairs at Astria Therapeutics. If you can go to the next slide just to showcase that. So I've been everywhere, but at the same place at the same time. I was born in Canada, so in Vancouver. When I was like 5 years old, moved over to Miami, and then obviously now I'm based in Boston. I got my undergraduate degree in biochem from Florida State University, and then I went on to pharmacy school in Atlanta, Georgia, at Mercer University. I pursued a regulatory affairs fellowship, and I'll dive into a lot of this towards the end when we talk a little bit about some qualifications in my journey into where I'm at now. And currently, I am a senior manager in at the Astria Reg Group, but my direct projects are pretty much on the Start 310 program where I serve as the regulatory lead. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. So there was a lot of good points that Stefan brought up, and it'll tie everything. And I think having marketing here or the commercial side, and then seeing the R&D, we all work in tandem, right? In regulatory, we look at the R&D trying to get a drug through approval process. But when a drug is approved, you really need to get on formularies, and that's where the market access and the business drives the continuum of pharma. So that I think that's an important note to make, that everything is tied in how it works. And the way you build the label or prescribing information or a PI is very important to driving the business and how they can market that from a commercial perspective. We'll talk a little bit about specifically the diverse roles within regulatory affairs. A lot of people just think of it as one thing, but there's a lot of different subsets of regulatory. So one of them is a regulatory app promo, which goes back into the review process and how highly regulated the pharmaceutical industry is. And it's always evolving. So keeping up with things such as real world evidence and keeping up with how the marketing team wants to utilize that, I think that's a growing field. The safety claims, the efficacy claims, making sure that they tie into the PI. That's all under the realm of a regulatory reviewer that would sit under a regulatory advertisement and promotion group. To me, it's a very strict schedule in a sense that when there's going to be reviews every week at certain times, it's in a repetitive kind of set. I would say within that group, strategy is another portion of regulatory, and it's specifically to the development strategy of an asset. So mitigating risk, assessing the competitive landscape, collaborating with other groups such as clinical development and clinical operations to develop a compliant and safe clinical trial for your patients, engaging with health agencies, so the FDA, whenever you want feedback on your development program, you always develop questions to then engage with these health agencies to aid your drug development, because at the end of the day, the agencies want to collaborate with pharma to create these efficacious and safe drugs. CMC is chemistry, manufacturing, and controls. And this is a very niche area. It's really focused on safely producing your drug, pretty much, right? Across the continuum. And that's the drug substance and the drug product, verifying stability and things of that nature. The other function that I want to speak in within regulatory is regulatory competitive intelligence. And this is really just what it says. It's looking at the market and seeing the ever changing landscape. So as guidances change, as the landscape changes, this team is responsible for feeding this information back to the general team. But there's other areas within regulatory, such as labeling that I did not mention here. And that's part of the prescribing information and a big aspect within the regulatory affairs field. I would say that there's a ton that you can do within this space. It's just identifying what interests you. If we can go to the next slide, I'm going to tie some of this in with actual activities. So, in my current role, I sit within regulatory strategy. I'm the lead for the asset, but there's a lot of different things I do. I'm in a small biotech. So, in a biotech environment, you're used as a Swiss Army knife, I would say. My focus is strategy, but I do everything and anything for my asset because it's just the name of the game when you're at a smaller company. So, first and foremost, managing a submission. So we're currently going for IND submission or investigational new drug application, and that is to get a trial started in humans. So you manage that project from the different subsections. So collaborating with the clinical development folks, the non-clinical folks to get their modules in place and authored within our timelines and upkeeping those timelines. That's a big task within my role. Another is supporting the clinical strategy team. And this is because we're gearing up to go into our first in human trials and developing those protocols. But it's really understanding competitors and the precedents, like what have they done? What endpoints have they done? What agency interactions are available? What can we learn from this information to then support the development of our clinical strategy? Something else that I do is competitive intelligence to assess additional indications for the asset that I am on. So I sit within dermatology, and we're currently assessing how we can pursue other indications. And that's really, again, just on the precedent side. What have other competitors done? What can we learn? Do we have an asset that can work within this space? One big one is assessing the need for regulatory interactions. You always want to ask your team throughout a development process, do we want to talk to the agency and do we have the information and data that will allow us to interact with the agency? So it's really looking at timelines for when you want trials to start, when you will have data. So a lot of identifying gaps, and you live in the gray a lot. In my role, things change. One day a timeline is one on a specific date, and the next thing you know, they want to accelerate it a week earlier. And now everything shifts, and you have to go back to the drawing board, pull people together, and align on what the next steps are, and getting this these milestones done. I think that ties back into kind of the project managing, but again, it's from a strategic endpoint. It's managing these timelines. How do we another key aspect is developing our global strategy. So just not just in the US, but looking at other territories such as Europe, Japan, and how we can leverage these interactions to get in some of these countries at a more efficient rate. And then one of the last things is your integrated development plan. And this is your development plan for your asset from every function's perspective, but how does that all tie in together? So this is one of the key drivers for asset development, I would say, and it's a fluid document that always changes. So as you can see on the previous slide, I show you specifics, and you can see how in my role, not only do I support some strategy things, but I sit within also doing some competitive intelligence and looking at other aspects within the regulatory field. But that is very different depending on where you're at. It could look a lot different at a different company where my focus would just be on the development of something of the drug versus doing almost everything that's on your plate. And you learn a lot, I would say, but that's the trade-off in going into the biotech space versus big pharma. And go to the next slide, please. Okay, skills for reg. This is great. I would say being a self-starter is I think that's needed across the industry, not just in regulatory. This is not a position where you clock in, you clock out, or someone's over your shoulder. So it's really like the time is yours to get projects done, meet timelines. You need to be a self-starter in initiating certain things within your groups, within how you develop content, getting back to individuals. I think that's extremely important. Being a collaborator, especially in regulatory strategy, is I think key. I I never speak to anyone in my function, in my role. It's always to external functions, right? The clinical development team, what's changed in the protocol? How does this affect us moving forward? The ClinOps team, when does the study start? How long is it going to be? What are the implications moving forward? It's just endless on what I'm assessing. CMC, are you going to be manufacturing this product in time for us to start this study, right? But it's also people managing and understanding the dynamic, having emotional intelligence to understand that communication flow. I think being a collaborator is extremely important in strategy specifically, but across the industry. A communicator. It goes without saying, you have to be able to say things and say them to the point, because sometimes if you say too much, you lose a crowd. And if you lose a crowd, you might have the same meeting a couple weeks later, talking about the same things. And that's something that's extremely important, which goes into kind of when you fellowship prep, if that's something that you want to do, and being able to answer these questions in a concise manner, that goes back to your communication skills. Foresight, looking ahead, identifying gaps, attention to detail. What small things are we missing? What can we fill in if we expedite certain things, and being efficient? The name of the game in strategy is efficiency. I like to say acceleration and chaos, because that's what it becomes. But you have to find a way to make it efficient. So it's just what comes with the role and having to develop efficiency. It's not the easiest thing, but you develop it as you go. We can go to the next slide. Okay, qualifications, and then we can talk about my path a little bit. So most individuals that sit within regulatory usually have a master's in regulatory affairs, or they have a JD, they're lawyers. But PharmDs are little by little, we're trickling in, especially having these PharmD fellowships. We're getting entry, which is we have insights that a lawyer may not have, right? Drug development and protocols, we learned that in pharmacy school. We understand that from a foundational perspective, and this is where we utilize that tool. This is what sets us apart from what is currently sitting within the regulatory function. I would say is not only having the experience on the regulatory side, but being able to connect on the medical and clinical side. I think that's extremely important and key to collaboration. So entry level positions can vary within each sub function. I've seen people go directly into ad promo with not much experience, but typically I see about 2 years for strategy with a master's in reg. That's typically what I see. So how did I get into regulatory affairs? How did I stumble upon this? I got a PharmD. I was actually interested in being a medical outcomes liaison. So I did want to be a market access the entire time I was in pharmacy school. And what they mentioned about having a mentor, it plays into the story is my first rotation was a regulatory labeling ad promo rotation with one of, if not the key mentor in my career development. And it made me think about things in a whole different way. And I pursued a fellowship with Alexion AstraZeneca Rare Disease. And I think Stefan, I've met you before for some reason. But I was at in this fellowship, it was rotational. So the key thing about this is that I was able to see different aspects of regulatory to really connect on what I wanted to do, what my skills lended to the most, and where I can see my growth within the industry. And a lot of people don't go into looking for a fellowship for, not to say the right reasons, but just to get a fellowship. You should really look to see how this is going to prepare your career, because this is the first step into the pharmaceutical industry. So I saw strategy, which I knew that was where I fit the best. I had an ad promo rotation, and I had a device regulatory strategy rotation where we're focusing on the device strategy. And this really allowed me to grow and see different perspectives within the regulatory affairs group, but also the stakeholder engagement. When you work in ad promo, you work with commercial. You don't work with the R&D team. So that engagement is a lot different than if you work in the strategy group, where you're going to engage with clin dev and clin ops and medical and these teams. In ad promo, you'll see the medical team and the medcoms, but you'll engage a lot with a medical reviewer, a legal reviewer, and the marketing team, of course. And then you can go to the next slide. Final tips and takeaways. If you're early to the game, I would say learn about as many functional areas that interest you. This is where you start to connect the dots. Oh, this is what they do. This is what they do. Okay, this is how these things work together. You start to see the continuum and how these functions work together. And when you make the decision, this is what I want to do, you can always utilize the fact that you have their perspective. You understand what it takes. You can use that in your back pocket. I was interested in market access. I was interested in medical, and I learned a lot of it through pharmacy school. And it's in my back pocket because I have a baseline, fundamental understanding of what they do, and it allows me to do my job with them in mind. And I think that's very important. Another thing is network. And I don't mean like you have to be the most outgoing person. Just say hi, start a conversation, join a group, anything within the industry, an organization, and being present. You never know who you can meet. You can end up meeting the next person that gives you a job. That's how the industry rolls. Soft skills are more important than what most of the time. I will say most of the time, meaning, of course, you need to know what you need to know. Let's not take that out of the equation. But at the end of the day, the brand being your authentic self, I was previously mentioned, comes from those soft skills. People wanting to work with you, understanding that you are willing to collaborate, the way that you communicate, the way you handle issues or feedback. These are things that you can't teach everyone these skills, right? You develop this. You develop it along the way and you go with it. So you utilize, I would say, all of your appies, whether it's clinical or industry related. You all have to present something, which means you public speak, which means you have to communicate. You all have to manage projects. It doesn't matter what kind of project is, it all has a timeline. And timelines are the name of the game in industry. So you can reflect that into developing those soft skills that then translate for a position within the pharmaceutical industry. And if you're heading towards fellowship prep, your CV will only get you in the door. That's as far as it's going to go. I've seen a JD, PharmD, I've seen a master's in reg PharmD, and I've seen them bomb in interviews. It's just how it goes. The more you practice, once you get into those first rounds, I promise you, you won't have to practice because you're going to hear yourself in the shower. It's just how it goes. But if you're proactive, which goes back to being a self-starter, you're able to build your story, build your brand, and most importantly, when you're being professional, be your authentic professional self. So I'm normally like this in a professional setting, but it's professional, right? Maybe outside of it, I'm a little bit more louder, as they like to say, but it they can see who you are and what you bring to the team, and that revolves around your brand. So the CV will get you in the door, but the fellowship and who you are and what you bring to the table will get you in the room. That's my last slide. Appreciate Libby. Thank you so much for allowing me to present. Has been great.
Yes, thank you so much for all the gems you just dropped there. And I 100% echo personal brand. That's something I tell all of my mentees, work on your personal brand, but make sure your personal brand is personal and it showcases who you are. So thank you all so much. Before we get into the Q&A, I have a poll. So again, we're popping up Slido. I want to know, what is your number one takeaway from today's session? So in the Slido app, there's a Q&A tab and a poll tab. Click that poll tab and feel free to pop in your answer here. So yeah, be your authentic self. I'm happy you got that because we've really been hitting that home. Let's see what else populated. Yeah, authenticity. Absolutely. Stay curious. So important. Be that lifelong learner. Build bridges, network, create your own brand. Yep. You have a brand. It's just redefining it a little bit, refining it, not redefining it necessarily. Communication is key. Companies are more interested in you than your credentials. I love that. Be proactive, be a self starter, self motivated. Thank you all for dropping in your personal gems. Authenticity is key. Love to see it. Thank you to our panelists and speakers for being able to share their insights and provide that advice this evening. Um, and then, as a reminder, um, for those of you who are registered to attend, um, there will be a feedback survey sent out sometime tomorrow, and you'll have the opportunity to win one of 3 gift cards for completing that feedback survey. So just want to put that plug out there. But again, thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights. Have a good evening, everyone.